One.
And welcome to Jmore's JBiz Entrepreneur Series, featuring accomplished entrepreneurs from a variety of industries throughout the greater Baltimore area. I'm your host, Gary Stein, and this series is brought to you by our friends at Nemphos Braue, offering big firm expertise and boutique service with lawyers experienced in all aspects of business and corporate law. Nemphos Braue focuses on building true strategic partnerships with their clients and strongly supports entrepreneurs and emerging businesses. Their subsidiary, Old Line Government Affairs, provides government relations, procurement, and state lobbying services with strong Maryland relationships and bipartisan access. For more information, go to nemphosbraue.com. That's spelled NEMPHOSBRAUE.com. Today, we bring you the story of two native Baltimoreans. They kind of knew each other in high school, I think you could say. One went to Franklin High School in Reisterstown, the other to Pikesville, lost touch, and then by chance sat next to each other at a mutual friend's wedding and reconnected years later. They discovered they each had a love for beer. And one thing led to another, as it usually does. And before you know it, Union Craft Brewing, one of Baltimore's best known breweries, was born. And our guests are co-founders of Union Craft, Adam Benesch and Jon Zerivitz. And guys, welcome in and Happy New Year to you. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Thanks for having us.
Guys, thank you. So let's pick it up from there in the interest of time. And Jon, we'll start with you for a minute. You were a graphic designer at T. Rowe Price. You had your own company before that. Adam, you were in finance and accounting at JMI Equity, Ernst & Young before that. Jon, you first. That's a long way from brewing beer for each one of you. So kind of just take us back to the wedding and what happened and how did it change your life?
Yeah, so fate would have me sit next to Adam at our good friend the Poff's wedding, and we just started chatting about some of our interests, and we hit on beer as a mutual interest. I had been sort of a burgeoning enthusiast since college, having preferred the local micro brews of the time over the sort of macro lagers that you would find at most college parties. And a little bit later on in life had been exploring beers of the world and really sort of educating myself about beer and beer making and growing an interest in home brewing. And Adam was sort of on the same journey. We just really found a mutual love for the beverage, and we started after that wedding. We started to kind of meet up weekly, whether at Max's Tap House down in Fells Point, or at one of the local breweries of the time, or at Adam's house, because he had been collecting beers for quite some time. So he would crack some bottles for us as well.
So Adam, how did those meetings go? Like, were you putting notes down on a napkin and kind of charting it out? Like, what was happening at those meetings?
Yeah, I think it started out just meeting and talking over beer and sharing beers and sharing ideas around beer, which quickly moved towards starting a brewery here in Baltimore, which was something I think each of us had dreamed about. Beer was usually involved in all the meetings. Hopefully we had better note taking than napkins, but we certainly shared ideas and got more serious over time about starting a brewery here in Baltimore and starting to put the pieces together and thinking about all the things you need to think about while starting a business.
So let's talk about your love of beer for a minute before we get into the nuts and bolts of what eventually became Union Craft. Adam, with you, where did your love of beer come from?
Yeah, I think I look back to my college days. This is mid-90s, and remembered not enjoying the macro lager beers that everybody was drinking around me. And visited. There was a beer store. I went to University of Maryland. There was a store in College Park that had a variety of beer options. Certainly nothing like the beer shelves look these days, with hundreds of varieties of different craft brews. But they were 5-10 different beers back then, the Sierra Nevadas, the Sam Adams, the Pete's Wicked Ales. And I remember trying one or two of those and really loving the complexity to them compared to the lagers, the macro lagers that everybody else was drinking, and just realizing that was more for me. I love the stories behind the brands. I love the liquid and how it tasted. and it kind of started and blossomed from there.
Jon, you went to school up in Massachusetts before you came back down to Baltimore. What was the beer scene like up there during your college?
Yeah, so we only had really one local microbrewery called Berkshire Brewing Company. I went to school at UMass in Amherst, by the Berkshire Mountains up there in Western Mass. And I remember very clearly once I turned 21, of course, and going to the local package store, that they actually had Berkshire Brewing Company beer packaged in growlers, which is a 64-ounce bottle with a screw cap, available for purchase. And that really intrigued me. And I started buying bottles of this really amazing, flavorful, rich, local product, and really fell in love with it. And so when there would be a keg party off campus, I would bring Berkshire Brewing Company. Inevitably there'd be a keg of Coors Light or whatever cheap beer that they could afford at the party, but I would always bring a little extra microbrew, and really developed a appreciation and respect for the product.
And Jon, let's take a little step to the side before we take a step forward. You had told me an interesting story about your first job. Actually, I think you may have still been in high school, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, in Baltimore. You were working at the Sutton Place Gourmet in the city. We all remember that. And that's kind of where you were staring at the packaging of Blue Moon, the pale ale from Belgium, and just something struck, and you're the creative guy, something about that packaging struck you. Just retell that story and what it was.
Yeah, sure. So I was just a teenager, I think barely 16, and I worked at Sutton Place Gourmet, and they had a very small beer and wine section. Come to think of it, I'm not sure how they were able to pull that off based on the legalities now. But they did have a small beer and wine section, and I worked in the produce department. We had a direct view of the case, and I remember the packaging of Blue Moon, and the colors jumping out at me, and the orange slice depicted on the rim of the glass on the 6-pack. And it really intrigued me because I had only really seen the ubiquitous Budweisers, Coors Lights, and things. And so it really stood out as being something different. And I kept that in mind as I got older, that was a product that I wanted to try.
We're talking with Jon Zerivitz and Adam Benesch, the co-founders of Union Craft Brewing. You know exactly where they're located if you travel down 83 by the iconic Pepsi sign in Baltimore City. And a reminder that this series is brought to you by Nemphos Braue, offering big firm expertise and boutique service with lawyers experienced in all aspects of business and corporate law. Nemphos Braue focuses on building true strategic partnerships with their clients, strongly supports entrepreneurs and emerging businesses. So before we get to the early days of the business, guys, let's talk for a moment about the early days of Baltimore beer brewing history, which I think is important to know to kind of bring us up to the present. Everyone knows the name Brewers Hill. Jon, you and I had a conversation about this. So go back a couple hundred years and tell us a little bit about the history and a little bit about Brewers Hill before it became the place where new people are moving into every day today.
Right. So a couple hundred years ago, that area of Baltimore, as well as some other areas of Baltimore, were populated by family-run, usually immigrant-run breweries that were making traditional German styles of beer, and a variety of styles as well. And they, were producing a ton, like thousands of barrels of beer, and they were getting bought up and every drop getting drank by the population here in Baltimore, and doing very well. Some of those families, became, these like legacy owners of these companies. But then Prohibition came, and while Baltimore didn't exactly abide by the rules of Prohibition, and we were known as a wet city, shortly after Prohibition was repealed, just a few major companies came to almost every city in the country that had a scene of beer production like we did here in Baltimore, and bought up all those family-run companies, so that there were really just a few companies remaining, and they all basically began making the same very cheap and efficient style of beer. American light lager was basically born from those German recipes, and sort of made very, simplified to be the most efficient, most profitable, low alcohol, easy drinking beer. And that really became synonymous with the American brewing scene all over the country, was just industrial light lager. And we lost a lot of that variety, and sort of that old world sensibility to brewing. But those companies also proliferated and did quite well and made thousands of barrels of beer a year. But it wasn't really until the late 80s that we started to see new small micro breweries start popping up that were bringing back a lot of the variety of styles that you can find in other places in the world, and starting to shake things up a little bit.
So let's fast forward then, Adam, from the from the 80s and 90s, basically, with the microbrews coming back, the craft brews, et cetera, to about the time that you guys started your company, which was in 2010, 2011. What was the state of the beer world like at that point when you guys started up?
Yeah, I think both of us had seen through our travels, visiting other cities around the country, craft breweries popping up in cities all over. And I think that was one of the questions that we kept coming back to when we were figuring out, can we open a brewery, is why are these cool neighborhood focused breweries popping up all over the country, but not in Baltimore? And that's what really drove us to kind of combine our passions between beer and our home city of Baltimore. And when you would travel around and visit other cities, you find breweries of all different kinds, shapes, and sizes. Some that are out in some nondescript warehouses out in the county that were focused on distribution of their beers to beer store shelves, versus cool smaller breweries that may have been in some neighborhood that was really just servicing that neighborhood, and everything in between. And that's when we really started looking at the different models of breweries that were happening at those times, and figuring out what we thought was right for Baltimore.
So Adam, let me ask you then, the question you asked a minute ago is you traveled around the country and saw how other cities were adapting to the beer culture and being progressive with the beer culture, right? And you asked the question, why isn't it happening in Baltimore? What was the answer that you came up with there? Why wasn't it happening in Baltimore?
We couldn't find a great reason, which is why we opened a brewery. Once we set on that path, we realized many of the challenges that probably aren't solely Baltimore based, but I think were certainly highlighted being here in Baltimore with, hey, when we opened a brewery, there hadn't been a distribution type brewery open in Baltimore City in over 30 years. And we couldn't come up with an answer why that was the case. Once we set out to do it, we got a better understanding of why. Zoning laws, beer manufacturing laws were all pretty outdated in Baltimore and in Maryland as a whole. And so that was a big item that we had to get better educated about and learn how we can work within those guidelines. But I think those types of issues probably existed in many other cities, so we didn't really let them get in our way. It just slowed us down a little bit until we figured it out in a more meaningful way, and then figured out our plan around that.
So guys, that's interesting. Jon, you wanted to go into the beer business and you wanted to learn how to make great beer and great experiences for people to enjoy their beer. And now all of a sudden you have to be a politician too. So talk to me about that, going to Annapolis with no experience probably, right? And dealing with that part of the business.
Yeah, it was a jarring experience for me personally, because I had gone from really 1 week working in a cubicle at T Row doing graphic design,
right,
to leaving that job and the next day going with Adam to purchase a forklift and bringing the forklift to our dirty garage that we were building out into a brewery. And then just a few weeks later, putting on a suit and tie and going to Annapolis to testify around around alcohol laws to allow us to have a tasting room at the brewery. That was our main goal. As we had seen the breweries around the country really kind of being folded into the fabric of a neighborhood, where a place where you might go after work to grab your beer fresh off the taps, where the tanks that were holding the beer just a day ago were right in the back, rather than go to a liquor store or go to a bar. That was our goal, and we couldn't do it when we first opened. So we were passionate about it, and it was it was an interesting experience. We learned a lot, and it wasn't going to be the last time that we were going to have to do that. Like Adam said, like we just had Maryland had a lot of laws on the books that had been there for far too long and really hadn't been challenged or hadn't been looked at. And we needed to modernize in order to keep up with our neighboring states that were really friendly to the growing craft beer industry. So we were willing to do whatever it took, no matter how inexperienced we may be at it.
So Adam, founded in 2011, Brewing, I believe, began in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, and you ran free tours. Every guest was allowed 6 little 3-ounce samples. I mean, to even think about this for a minute, like back when it was like 10 years ago. Talk to me about the evolution of a person's experience in going to your brewery, like what you guys did back then and now what it's morphed into.
Yeah, that was, when, as you mentioned, when we first opened, you were not legally allowed to go to a brewery in Maryland and buy a pint of beer.
Right.
Samples that you took
Crazy.
before, and all these crazy rules. And that was not ideal for us in opening a business. We knew that for us to be successful, we had to get people to come visit us and for them to have a great time. And then they'd be much more likely to try one of our beers at a bar or pick up a 6-pack at a beer store. And so from the beginning, we put a lot of focus on visitor experience and what that can mean to somebody from the community taking time out of their day to come visit us. Once that law changed, within the first year of us being in business, that we were allowed to serve pints and sell pints, that was a huge change in what we had originally set up for versus what we had dreamt of doing. Our original tap room, I think, was about just shy of 600 square feet, whereas our new tap room is closer to about 7,000 square feet. So
wow,
that was a big change. We operated in our 600 square foot tap room for a few years at our old location, and we knew that that was not the right answer based on what the community wanted and what we thought we could draw to the brewery. And so from the beginning, we always really wanted to highlight that experience through educational brewery tours, through events at the breweries. We love live music. We love bringing live music to the brewery. We love hosting community-focused events that may highlight a nonprofit that's doing great work in our community, or other small businesses that are just getting started in Baltimore. That's where we really started learning about and valuing the experience, customer experience of coming to the brewery. And of course, they're coming for a beer or to hang out with friends, but we love providing things beyond that, whether it's education on how to make beer or whether it's introducing them to their new favorite nonprofit here in Baltimore. That's what we really love doing.
Jon, talk a little bit about the name Union Brewing Company and the shift in location from Union, I think, is it Union Avenue or Union Street?
It was Union Avenue.
Right.
Yeah, now we're on 41st.
Right. So talk to me about the change in location from Union to the 41st Street area.
Sure. So we did derive the name of the company from our original location. We had been brainstorming names for the company for quite some time. But when we landed on our first home down in Woodbury at the bottom of Union Avenue, we really felt connected to the history of that area and had a real kind of sense of place of what had happened there previously. Even in the building we were in had some historical significance. And we wanted to connect with the sort of the labor movement that had occurred down in the old mills in historic Woodbury. And at the same time, we had built the brewery based on being community focused and based on being champions of our city and the fact that locally produced products, especially beer, really bring people together. So our slogan is Beer Unites, and we are Union Brewing Company because of those reasons. The original location was really small, and we did as much as we could possibly do in that space until there was just no room to expand. We're very fortunate that that all occurred within the first 5 years of the company. And then we knew that we needed to seek out a larger space to continue growing. And just in our backyard was this huge warehouse that was it was a Sears, not a Sears store, but a Sears warehouse and repair center. You could bring your lawnmower here to be fixed. And a lot of the old timer community members remember it as the Sears. It was being used by another company for quite some time, but they were moving out as well. And so after an extensive search around the city, we actually landed right back in our backyard. We're only about a half mile from our original location. And while this building was far too big for our uses, we developed this idea that we had a real kinship with a lot of the small manufacturing businesses that had started around the same time that we did. We came up with this idea that everybody should share in what craft beer gets to enjoy, which is the customer comes to the actual manufacturing plant, gets to see the product being made, as well as get to enjoy it on site and leave with some. And so we thought if craft beer can do this, then it should also apply to coffee and ice cream and spirits and all of these other categories. And so we decided that we would buy the whole building and reach out to these other manufacturers and bring them in on what we were enjoying so that we could have a real sort of hub of local manufacturing right here in Baltimore City, rather than have that be pushed out to the outskirts of the city where people don't really go.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you see now. You see all the signs as you go up and down 83 of all the quote unquote tenants that occupy that manufacturing area. Beautifully done. Adam, tell me about the feeling in your gut when you finally accomplished this goal of opening up a brewery. You quit a corporate job, you quit security, you quit a paycheck, you had responsibility to your family. Now you were employers, so you were going to have responsibility for other people's lives. The feeling in your gut as to how it felt about what you were doing.
Yeah, I think it's fun to look back to those years, 10 plus years ago. I think at first we were all just so incredibly excited that, hey, we opened a brewery. Look, we did it. But I think we quickly realized the opening was just the beginning, and then operating a business and being an employer carries a lot of weight and responsibility. Leaving the corporate job for each of us, was a big step that we had to have very frank conversations with our families, each of us married and with kids, but incredible support from our families and our wives and our children and beyond to give us the kind of freedom to pursue our passions, and we were grateful for all of that. But it quickly became a reality that we had to operate and execute at a high level for this dream that we were so excited to create, to live forward. And so that became our immediate focus in creating the best beers that we could create, putting on the best events that we could put on, hiring the best people that we could find, and training them. Most of the people early on, because there weren't very many breweries around, most people did not come from another brewery and had direct experience. There's a lot of on-the-job training for all of us. And so that became a big focus, to have the right processes in place to make delicious beer time and time again. We knew that, hey, we could do all the great things and have a great tap room and have great events, but if the beer wasn't excellent and phenomenal, people wouldn't come back. And so that remained the focus early on and still to this day, to make sure we're making the best product that we can make for the people to enjoy. But those early days were exciting. We were all very hands-on at the time. There were not a lot of people around the brewery, 2, 3, 4 people on any given day. And so between brewing and kegging and working the tap room, and selling beer. We all wore many different hats, which was pretty exciting at the time. It got old quick, but it was pretty exciting for a period of time. And as we've grown, we've been able to add more people to the mix that are all really good at what they specifically do, that in some ways make our jobs easier so that we can focus on the things that we need to focus on.
So that's interesting. So Jon, I'm just going to pick that up. Adam said, like, not only were you and Adam novices really at making beer and owning a business, but even the people that you employed were pretty much novices in terms of the brewery. So, like, were there any mentors in place for you guys? Like, where did you guys go for, if there was a place for advice or mentorship or anything like that in your business?
You know, one of the reasons why Adam and I got into this particular industry, not just because of our love of beer, but because we loved the industry, because of how open it was to mentorship and to giving free advice. There was a real sort of sense of fraternity amongst those who started brewing companies, especially 11 years ago. And you really could reach out to almost anyone in the industry and expect to get received warmly and to be given solid advice. So we were able to reach out to a lot of successful companies and make some quick friendships with folks who had come before us in order to help us out and get through those early days.
To sum it up real quick, I was reading a little bit about, and I'm an entrepreneur myself, entrepreneurship and mentorship, etc. Jon, your opinion, there are some on the side of, you know, when somebody gives advice to a potential entrepreneur, usually, many times at least, the advice is follow your passion, right? If you're passionate about it, it'll never be work. You'll love it every day, et cetera, et cetera. But there's another train of thought that says, you know, most times passion isn't where you should go. It's where your strengths are, where you think your abilities actually lie. Which side of the entrepreneurship advice do you think you would fall on?
I think I would fall more towards the follow your passion, with caution that something that you are passionate about that becomes your full-time job can quickly become something you're not so passionate about in the same way. Whereas I got into this because I loved beer and I loved the culture of breweries, I'm now driven day to day by the challenges of entrepreneurship and by the challenges of running a business. And so it's you know, it's like, I know that we can make good beer, and I know that we've produced a cool culture around the beer, and we've achieved some of those goals. But I find that I found new passions within that journey. And I don't necessarily find myself, you know, I don't go home and homebrew. I'm not so passionate about beer that after I work a day at the brewery, I go home and brew a batch of beer at home anymore. So, you know, my hobby becoming my profession has definitely sort of changed the nature of my relationship with that, I'd say.
And I think the real secret sauce is if you can do both of those, right? If you can have a passion that you can apply your life experiences and work experiences towards, that's when you can really create something special. And I think both Jon and I had a strong passion for beer, but also went into the business knowing what we each are good at, right? So Jon, from a graphic design and brand building and creative side, applying that to beer, and same thing for me from the business operations and finance world, applying that to a beer business is, I think, part of how we've been able to be successful.
So Adam, a final word from you. You know, the last thing that a company wants to do is stay stagnant. You always have to keep looking to the future, always have to keep up with what's going on, etc. The first 10, 11 years for you guys, you've accomplished so much. You've really changed the culture of beer in Baltimore. You've been a big part of that. As you look forward to the next 10 years, and you may not know off the top of your head, or, you know, but what do you see? What do you want to accomplish? What do you see happening in your industry?
Yeah, I think you know, we're grateful to be in the position that we are, where we're able to create great beers in a wonderful facility and welcome the community on a regular basis. And so we want to continue to do that the best that we can. I think the beer world is continuing to evolve. I think we've gone through a period where craft beer consumers were looking for the biggest, craziest thing they could find, whether it's a beer with all kinds of different fruit additions or graham crackers or super high ABV beers. I think has started to settle down a little bit, where people are now more likely to gravitate towards delicious beer that tastes like beer. We came out with a new product this past year, Zadie's Lager, in honor of my Zadie, my grandpa, and I think that really speaks to what it feels like the next phase of the local craft beer drinker may be, where they're looking for a beer that they can have a few of them in a sitting, not get full, not get completely wasted from drinking 3 beers. So lower ABV, super high quality beers like lagers, but other styles as well, as where I think things are heading. Who knows? If you know, please let us know. That's what it feels to us. And a lot of times we think about how we're enjoying craft beers and what our interests are in. And we certainly noticed both us and our staff gravitating towards these styles of beer. So we wanted to set out to create the best example we could of it.
Well, I'll give you another Hebrew expression, and it's called kol hakavod. And that's what I want to tell to you guys, 2 Hebrew words, which means all the honor, all the thanks for what you've done. You've really been a big part of the fabric of this community and bringing what you brought to us. And me being a beer lover too, I certainly appreciate what you guys have done. So again, kol hakavod to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary.
Absolutely. And that's it. That'll be the final word here on the JBiz Entrepreneur Series. Our guests have been Adam Benesch, Jon Zerivitz, co-founders of Union Craft Brewing. You can't miss them. Up and down 83, right by the iconic Pepsi sign. Check out all the different vendors that are located in their manufacturing space. And to our viewers, I say so long, stay well. And we again have been brought to you by Nemphos Braue, supporting corporate growth at every stage of business. Learn more about Nemphos Braue, what they can do for you, by logging on at nemphosbraue.com. I'll spell it one more time, NEMPHOSBRAUE.com. Jon, Adam, be well, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Gary.
Gary.